I hate this manga. That's what I told myself as I reached chapter 20 of Aku no Hana, also known as Flowers of Evil. Flowers of Evil got me to feel in a way that not many mangas have been able to do, but not the good I finally released the huge shit that's been resting deep inside my caves kind of feeling, but the pain-inducing fuck I'm constipated and need immediate life support kind of feeling. You see, upon first impression, this manga made me upset, frustrated, mad, anxious, confused, and a plethora of other negative emotions. In no way, at no point within those initial chapters did I actually enjoy myself. In fact, I dreaded having to read each and every chapter. It was a complete pain in the ass to do, and I felt like I was wasting my time. Even though the manga was relatively short with just under 60 chapters, I was extremely conflicted as to whether or not I should continue onward. On one hand, the praise surrounding Flowers of Evil intrigued me to push through, but on the other, I hated each second spent subjugating myself to such torture. Now, am I exaggerating? Yes, kind of. I'm not joking when I tell you enjoyment-wise, those first 20 chapters were hell to read through, but I also don't want you to think that my feelings of frustration and distaste were aspects that made this manga bad. They actually made it all the better. Because while these emotions early on were mostly negative, what's undeniable is this manga got me to feel, and it undoubtedly will have the same effect on you. Strangely enough, this manga that I wholeheartedly despised in the beginning is now, having completed it, one of my favorite reads within the past year. This guy's our main character. His name is Kasuga Takao. Now, Kasuga is your typical introverted kid who still has some friends to keep him company in school. He likes this girl named Saiki Nanako, who's your average not so average middle school beauty. She's sweet, she's kind, and Kasuga views her as an angel. On the opposite end, there's this crazy bitch named Nakamura, who reminds me of every middle schooler who first learned how to curse. And of course, that means going through that rebellious phase, which for Nakamura leads to this. Shut it, fuckface! Bro, what the fuck did I just say? Now, back to Kasuga. He's a pretty big book nerd with one of his favorite reads titled Flowers of Evil. One day, he mistakenly leaves his copy of the book in his classroom, so he goes to get it. During his search, he sees Saiki's left behind bag, which happened to hold some national treasures in the form of her panties. So like a dumbass kid, he goes to inspect said panties. Suddenly, there's a clicking noise, and scared of getting caught, Kasuga books it. Kind of like me every time my mom found my report card. Regardless, what makes this whole conflict interesting is in the process of running away, on impulse the dude brings Saiki's school uniform, panties included, along with him. Thus, there's now a dilemma of what do I do? What if someone saw me? How do I return Saiki's clothes without being seen as a creep? However, these questions are quickly cast aside as soon after Kasuga encounters a wild Pokemon, Nakamura. She reveals how she saw him in the act, and with said information, essentially blackmails Kasuga into doing her bidding. If he doesn't, she intends to expose him to everyone. It's now a question of how far he'll be pushed before he eventually breaks, and if and how he'll get caught. In my opinion, this is a really solid and interesting introduction / premise. There's already stakes, tension, and a natural buildup of anxiety. Anxiety that's invoked both within Kasuga as well as us. We don't really know where the story will go, but as onlookers, we want Kasuga to somehow escape his predicament. Best case scenario being, he destroys the evidence and goes back to a life of normality. But there's a problem. Kasuga is kind of retarded and also a pussy, and it's partly because of these two character traits that led to my lack of enjoyment early on in this manga. So much so that I didn't just feel distaste towards Flowers of Evil, but I straight up hated it. See, for Kasuga, being in a scenario where his entire reputation could potentially be ruined fucks with his head. He doesn't know what to do, and he goes through mental turmoil trying to figure out what his best course of action is. He's also unsocial, and on top of that, he's now dealing with the stress of getting his secret exposed. And so all of this leads him to making some really dumb, albeit justifiable, but still really dumb decisions, which in the process also leads him to letting Nakamura push him around in every way possible. Throughout a lot of their interactions, he explains how he never intended to take Saiki's clothes home, and how it was just an in-the-moment decision due to being scared. But Nakamura refuses to give these words any time of day and continues to put him into unfavorable situations. For example, Kasuga scores a date with Saiki because reasons. I'm too lazy to explain how, but once Nakamura learns of this, she tells Kasuga to wear the clothes he stole, You know, the same ones that belong to the very person he's about to meet with under his current fit for the date. And despite Kasuga desperately wanting to get rid of said stolen clothes, and also not wanting to do what Nakamura just asked, Kasuga still goes through with her demands. Now, I can't be the only one who thinks what I just described sounds extremely stupid. This man just agreed to go on a date with the girl he's crushing on, all the while wearing that same girl's stolen clothes under his date fit. Like, what? Now, to be fair, there are clear reasons as to why he acts the way he does, some of which I've mentioned. He's getting blackmailed, he's a kid, he's human, and human beings are oftentimes irrational, and so his actions have a degree of realism, but that doesn't change the fact that reading scenes like this made me want to pull my hair out. In another scene, Kasuga decides to become the panty boogeyman, which was some weirdo shit, dude. But yeah, I did not have fun watching this baboon go ape mode every time he got screen time. His incompetence and lack of brain cells made him really unlikable, and it made me actively upset. I continuously thought to myself, bro, just burn the clothes, pretend like you didn't do shit, and call it a day. Yes, there's still a risk of you getting caught, but it's a whole lot better than following Nakamura, because that bitch is crazy and she'll make you do crazy shit, so don't do it. But of course, Kasuga didn't listen to my advice, partly cause he's a fictional character. Now, I hope I haven't come off as overly harsh, negative, and or critical, because my goal isn't to shit on this manga. I'm just telling you how I honestly felt within these opening chapters. And fun fact, my goal is actually the opposite. You see, initially, I couldn't find enjoyment in how the main character and story overall was portrayed, and in chapter 16, I reached my breaking point. Because in chapter 16, something happened. Something so beyond absurd that I needed to take a breather. I put my phone down and went to release my pent-up frustrations not in the bathroom, but by re-evaluating my life choices. I asked myself, why was I reading something that made me so mad? And the answer was simple. I wanted to see how everything would end. And with that context, I want to address what makes this manga so compelling. Its ability to tell a story that without question gets an emotional response out of the reader. Oshimi, the mangaka behind Flowers of Evil, does this through his excellent use of emotional dissonance, taking the reader on a roller coaster of a journey, a roller coaster of emotions, by invoking feelings to that of discomfort and displeasure. Now, so far, I've only described the scenes that have made me upset, but these emotions were only momentary and very quickly faded. Beyond that, however, existed emotions that stuck with me throughout my entire read. Emotions that instilled a lurking sense of anxiety, a fear of the unknown. You see, as I continued to read on, seeing the story unfold made me increasingly uncomfortable. And this was because I desperately wanted Kasuga to break out of his situation. But at each point, things only got more and more twisted, leading to a much darker path than I wished for. The tension never ceased and the stakes continuously grew. With each order Nakamura made and each action Kasuga took, the consequences and severity of actually getting caught increased exponentially. And it's this contrast between what we want, what we feel, and what we're shown that all conjoin together to create something that's fascinating, but at the same time, also extremely disturbing. A feeling as though not all is right, and this feeling of disturbance is something that Oshimi executed upon brilliantly. At every point, by putting his characters into bizarre, unpleasant, and stress-inducing scenarios, he inadvertently forced the readers to feel those very same emotions. He forced them to feel anxious about what lied ahead. And so, naturally, readers ask themselves questions like, where will all of this lead? What will happen to Kasuga? Will he get caught? Or will something entirely different occur? In my case, I was both nervous yet entranced by what the future entailed. And even though at first I actually wanted to drop Flowers of Evil, the deeper I got into the story, the more I couldn't bring myself to leave things unfinished. I wanted to see where Kasuga would end up, where the story would go, and hopefully in the process, maybe get closure. But instead, as I moved from chapter to chapter, that sense of anxiety only grew, which in turn served to keep me wanting even more. And so I continued to stick around because I wanted to satiate my curiosity. Now, another point of interest I think is worth mentioning is Kasuga and Nakamura's relationship. It's a relationship drawing very similar connections to that of a deal with the devil. Substitute Nakamura as the devil and Kasuga as the victim. When the two first meet, Nakamura explicitly tells Kasuga to make a pact. And through manipulation and blackmail, she forces Kasuga to obey while she in return keeps his secret a secret. It's a one-sided agreement with Kasuga subject to Nakamura's whims, one that does more harm than good, kind of like a devil's pact. Thus, through meeting Nakamura, through accepting her pact, Kasuga's life is flipped completely upside down, and in the process, he very literally starts to tread the path of tragedy. Insanity leads to more insanity, and thus the story depicts the horrors of obsession, depravity, delusion, and loss of reason. On top of that, you then start to realize that Nakamura isn't the only crazy person around. Two other characters also have a couple screws loose. And here's where the Flowers of Evil come in. Through some phenomenal imagery, the Flowers of Evil symbolize temptation and escapism. You see, Kasuga was put into a situation because of temptation. In other words, the Flowers of Evil lured him in. And once he was within its grasp, he slowly separated himself from reality. More specifically, his mind became warped, and instead of wanting to live a life of normality, he ended up wanting to escape to the quote-unquote other side. So I am being purposely vague here as to not spoil anything, but hopefully I still got the main message across. This manga is disturbing. It gives off a very distinct and unorthodox feel when telling its story. But as you read on, you eventually become hooked in anticipation of how everything will conclude, until it all comes crashing down. A climax occurs, and just like that, everything resets. Insanity reverts back into normalcy. You see, Flowers of Evil is split into two parts, the first of which I've already described, the Kasuga and Nakamura plotline. But the second core is about the aftermath. Here, the story takes a momentary pause, and it's also here when the story becomes the most interesting. We see elements like trauma and depression being discussed, and how people dealing with it, in this case Kasuga, have it affect every facet of their lives. It continues to resurfaces, and no matter how much they try to forget or be normal, they can't. Instead, they have to pretend like they're okay, pretend like they've moved on, when in reality, they haven't. But that's part of being human. You can't just forget, you can't just lock away your past. The past defines you, it makes you who you are. And for Kasuga, his past is one of trauma, and this second core is about facing that trauma, about overcoming it. I really liked how the manga did this. It was actually at this point when I couldn't put the manga down. I was beyond immersed and heavily invested. That feeling of anger I once felt was now replaced by longing and a desire to see Kasuga properly reach some sort of happy end. I wanted to see him get closure, and in the process, that would allow me to get closure. Flowers of Evil isn't for everyone. I actually started writing this script at around chapter 30 because it got such a knee-jerk reaction out of me. And the first draft of this script was mostly me just telling you this manga was ass. But by the time I got to the second core and the closer I got to finishing, my perception pulled a complete 180. My hate turned into a genuine appreciation and care for this series. Flowers of Evil is a psychological thriller that will get you to feel. And those feelings may be negative at first, but negative doesn't inherently mean bad. And if you can stick through it, then you might end up experiencing something special. Now, I can't say for certain how you'll react. Maybe you'll be addicted to reading it from start to finish. Maybe you'll want to drop it at each concurrent chapter. But for me, despite everything, I read Flowers of Evil in completion, and it fully delivered. While I didn't enjoy it at first, it was precisely because the beginning was so painstakingly disturbing and difficult to read that when I actually reached the payoff, it hit all the more. And by the end of it, everything came full circle. I was satisfied, I got closure, and my time spent was worthwhile. Yo, thank you for watching. Don't close out the video just yet. I need to tell you guys some very important information. I checked my YouTube analytics and was aware of the fact that what was I gonna say? I checked my YouTube analytics and was aware of the fact that exactly 0% of you guys are subscribed to my channel, which is a big no-no. You guys are missing out on literal words of enlightenment. Now, watching me won't get your girlfriend or boyfriend if I somehow have female viewers, but maybe instead of crying your days away, you can listen to my totally not so soothing voice and feel better about yourself, maybe, yeah? Nah, but in all seriousness, I appreciate all of you for watching. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed the video, or don't if you didn't. I'm cool with either, but I'm gonna catch you guys in the next one, and peace.